Hey guys, this is Miko here, back with another video. This one's gonna be a guide to gems. I'm gonna be talking about the defensive ones. The offensive ones I like to talk in as like individual class guides because they change a lot, but the defense ones are fairly common at this point. The one exception to this, I'm mostly gonna be talking about percentages, not actual like super specific splits. The one thing I will say though is if you're a melee, the gem setup gets really weird with the rune glass. Basically, there's a bug right now where if you use the melee boosting rune glass, you'll actually lose damage. So what a lot of melee have been doing is they actually go the void damage boosting rune glass, and then they'll kind of try to do void attunement in the great axe if they can get this. If they cannot, they just try to do as much void as they can in their great axe. And the reason why they do that is that the void will scale off of Gravwell a little bit, and then you get the little bit of bonus from the void, and you also can kind of circumvent some of the natural resistances. But the melee gems seem to be bugged right now. There's a thing, a video someone made where it was basically they're inconsistent when they actually proc. So a lot of people have been trying to figure out a gem setup that is less conditional, and that happens to be elemental. So that's been something that's been happening. But in terms of like more standard guides, uh, gems in general, I mean, if you're looking at a very high level, ideally when you're looking at gems, like there's an argument that you just want to run 10-10 split and then throw on a slash Amy and not really think about it. Uh, that is fine if you don't really pay attention to your meta. If you really pay attention to where you are and where you play and like what you're facing against, you can get very, very specific with gems. So on some characters, what I run for certain classes is I'll run like 25 slash 5 general physical to have some, and then I'll dump a bunch into fire, and then I'll have a little bit of elemental. So like my on Greatsword Warhammer, for example, or sorry, on Greatsword Hatchet, for example, when I play that Kill Squad build that I posted a couple of videos about, I will specifically run like 25 slash, or sorry, not yeah, it's no, it's 22.5 slash 12.5 general physical because that build has to deal with a lot of kill squads. So there's like bows that are running around, and I don't want to get one shot by them. And then on the elemental side, I go 12 fire, and then I do 0 general elemental. And the reason why I do the 12 fire is because of a thing that a lot of people have been doing, and this is where it kind of gets meta dependent. So in the current meta, Blunderbuss is played a lot and kills people a lot. Greatsword is played a lot and kills people a lot. Great Axe is played a lot and is killed and kills people a lot. And Bow is played a lot. But the interesting part is the Blunderbuss, although this is like a main thrust damage and Bow is a main thrust damage, what a lot of these players have been doing. So as a healer, if you're a defensive like healer, but has been meta for a very long time, is that healers will just go straight thrust basically and like have a little bit of slash. So they might go have like 25 slash, 25 thrust or something like that, and basically no elemental. So what bows and blunderbuss have been slotted for and are doing now is they're being charged with killing healers because healers are expected to ward that way, so they kind of circumvent what's traditional, I guess. Like bows traditionally would not do this, but in current meta, bows tend to go fire gems, and the reason why they go fire gems is to for the like fire damage boosting gems is because it affects explosive shot, and then it also affects like you can have deal more damage because you're circumventing around normal attacks. The problem with that is then well basically so how do you take advantage of this, right? Like bows tend to slot fire gems, they have explosive shot that does fire damage. This does fire damage. Fire staff is not a real thing, it doesn't exist at the moment. So you have to, if you're a healer, you want to ward against some fire, and then you want to ward a lot against thrust, and then you have to be able to deal with the great sword combo. So it's like at that point, since you're warding against two different, like if you're warding against bow and greatsword, it's better just to go general physical ward because you're trying to ward against two things, and then slap in a amulet that wards specifically against one of them, which is probably going to be thrust if you're healer, and then have some fire. So I'd probably do like 12 fire, around 15, 12 to point 5 to 15 general physical, and then swap in a thrust protection amulet, and then I would kind of like call it a day and play around with that. But the base idea trying to get across for all these is you want to ward against what's your counter. So as a healer, what are you going to be fighting? You're going to be fighting, well, you don't want to be fighting, but if when you're getting hit, you're going to be hit by greatsword, you're going to be hit by bow, and you're going to be hit by blunderbuss, and a little bit of musket. All these are going to be doing well. Musket's the only one that's like a little bit weird because it will just be doing like a general elemental. They won't go into fire unless they are doing this bow musket build, in which case they will go into fire, which is what most people are running traditionally with musket. So it's like basically you want to tend to ward against fire a little bit more than your general elemental right now. There are some builds that I've seen people just strictly ward against fire, not any other elemental, because the other elemental damage is not scary. That's somewhat countered by this whole Great Axe thing where people go Void, but if people are like slower on that on your server, and in order to tell if people are slower than that, you just kind of have to ask the bruises that are in your work what they're doing. But if they're slow on that meta shift, then you probably don't want to over rotate the meta, and you can just like kind of ward to fire. But this part's like really meta dependent on like what server you're on. For example, in EU right now, people were slotting the fire gem stuff, but then people started running fire wards. So now EU bows are actually going ice damage because no one wards against ice, and great axes are going. They're trying to boost the void damage, right? So at that point, you can't really ward against void, fire, and ice. So you just want to go general void. But if people on your meta are stacking fire, then it makes sense to go fire. And usually it's not like a circumstance where it's like, hey, no one's running fire resistance. Maybe we should slot a fire staff. It's like more of a, hey, everyone's not running fire resistance. Maybe we should like run a bow that has a fire gem in it. Like you don't want to overcompensate for the meta, but swapping your actual gem setup seems to be fairly effective. So that's like the base case of like healers, like what you want to run. In terms of being like a ball groups are the ones that are most common to run a 10-10 split, and then between 5 and 10 general physical, and then throw on a slash protection amulet. I think that setup is like fine. If I were to run it personally, I would probably go up on the fire damage a little bit, so I would do like 5 percent general fire, or I'd do 5% general elemental, and then I would do 12 plus 5, so 17% fire, and then I would do between 10 to 25 slash. The reason being is most of your fights will be against the melees, but blunderbusses tend to dump their damage on top of great axes because great axes commit into clumps. So you want to tend to ward against them a little bit more as well, and general elemental won't affect you as much. This also applies if you're like a general person on point. Like if I'm playing VGBB, if I'm playing IGBB, I like to run a lot of slash because typically great axe people like to swing on me because I'm fairly stationary. So I've run a lot of slash, and then I go general elemental with this build, but I've honestly tried to get fire gems. I was just lazy for this war, and I did not put fire gems in here. Normally I would put uh, two fire gems in this sort of setup right now. So I would go up to 12% fire resistance. And that basically I'm just trying to take a little bit less damage to what the meta is. Again, if you don't exactly know what is happening with the best players on your server in the meta, then I would probably just go 10-10 and then either do the amulet of choice for whatever ward you need. If you're a healer, you probably want thrust, because most of the things that kill you as a healer are thrust. But healers like one in particular, where you generally want to stack into one a type of resistance that kills you the most, just because you don't have like a good way to live versus some classes, which is why healers tend to do that more than other classes. Versus other classes are more versatile, and it's like you could tech versus classes by increasing resistance to them if you're weaker to that class, but it doesn't make sense to overcompensate. And resistances like the split I'm running is one reason why that some people particularly use a Warhammer and try to swing at the Warhammer more in wars, because people tend to ward less against the Warhammer, so you end up doing more damage than a Great Axe at times. But at the same time, if you're forcing someone to use a Warhammer and not a Great Axe, it's inherently bringing value. So there's like a conversation there, but that's what I would say for Deady Point. You generally don't need to ward against thrust because you're not going to be dealing with kill squads almost ever. And if you're on a normal group, I would tend to run a more standard like 10-10 setup, and then run 10 in that slash because great axe and great sword are the meta specs at the moment, so it makes sense to tech in a slash. If great sword got nerfed tomorrow and got deleted from the game, and then it would be a conversation of like what you would put that extra ward into. If it were me in the current meta and the great sword fell off the face of the earth, I'd probably put it into fire because fire is like fairly common, and then I would just do a general elemental split. But also, great axe is very common as well, so we have to take that into consideration. It just happens to be a meta where great sword and great axe both use slash and are both the most common specs to see in a war. So That's it for like the main group in Diddy Point. Even if you're not a bruiser, if you're just like in a normal side group, I think it's pretty similar where you want to tech a little bit against fire, but and you'd probably do a little bit less slash, and then you would do a little bit more general because you could be faced with bows, but you most likely will be just faced with melees. But it's not like you're just on point where you're just eating a bunch of random slash damage and a bunch of random BB fire damage. So, and then if you're in a kill squad group, this is where it kind of gets similar to healers, where you want to tech heavy against. Well, it depends on your role. There are some people like a medium greatsword hatchet is tasked with kind of dealing with great axes because they have to, and that kind of build would run a lot of slash. So what's common for that build is you do 2.25% slash damage. I already talked about this a bit, and 12.5% strike because you typically the builds that kill you are the physical damage builds, and then you do a little bit less in elemental, but you probably want to put that elemental into fire because people are stacking fire right now. But if I'm a build like say a bow, then what's going to counter a bow, right? Like a great sword is not going to be able to get in range of a bow typically. A great axe is not going to be able to get in range of a bow typically. So I'm going to put all my damage resistance into fire, and I'm going to put it into thrust because thrust damage will hit me and fire damage will hit me. But nothing else really will in the current meta. So that's like a circumstance for how you can navigate around what's traditional. So yeah, it's the big thing. The other thing that takes into consideration with these builds is like what do you want to run in terms of dust or oak. EU in particular always runs oak at the current meta. NA, it's a conversation. I haven't seen EU VODs where people run dust. The reason why people run oak is because the people that kill you are typically great swords, or they are great axes, or they're bows, right? Or maybe they're muskets. All of those get damage reduction from the actual oak itself. If you're on directly on point, Gemstone Dust has an argument to be played because there's a lot of random elemental stuff that gets thrown around. Like if you're playing against an army that runs 10 BBs, there's going to be a lot of fire damage. And you probably want that elemental dust. There's also a thing like a infused fire resistance potion. That's sometimes a conversation for Deadly Point given the meta. This would be a meta where it is a conversation because there's enough fire damage being thrown around where that might be more beneficial than a powerful void, powerful void dust powerful gemstone dust. I don't know why I was saying that. But the fire absorption stuff, it's only impactful if you take more than 15 hits. Yeah, if you take more than 15 hits in the next 30 seconds, then the fire absorption stuff can be impactful. So it's generally not run, but it is a interesting tech option at times. I would typically not run that though. But say like you're a healer, right? And what are you gonna die to? You're gonna die to stuff that does physical damage. So you may be in the spot where it's like you want to drop your physical a little bit, run a little bit more fire, and then run oak flesh. But again, oak flesh would be the main default because people tend to do physical damage. So I know this is like a pretty general guide, but the base idea here is you want to adapt your resistance to what you're facing, and that depends a little bit on every server. On my accounts, I typically tend to swap a little bit into fire, and I tend to overcompensate on slash. Because slash damage is this thing that kills me. If someone throws a gravel at me, I'm not going to be dying to the gravel pop. I'll dodge that. I won't be dying to the hammer stun because that will set me up, but they will try to kill me with the great axe, which is why I wore the slash so much. It is also noteworthy that the resistance in here does contribute to fortify cap. If you go over Fortify Cap, it will start counteracting runs, though, so it's not that big of a deal, unlike in Power Cap, where in Power Cap, if you go over that, it is a big deal, because you just won't be able to get any value out of those skills. But with going over Fortify Cap, you will still get value, so that's less of a big deal than it is with other weapons. But yeah, I know this is a pretty general guide, but that's the base idea is you want to ward to whatever you're looking at, and then if you can get like an old jewelry, like an old amulet, old ring, old earring, those are always more valuable because you could swap whatever gem is in there as a default. And if you're buying jewelry, you want something that's like good for your role. So if I'm buying like an earring that has or if I'm buying an amulet that has an onyx in it, for example, but I want to heavily ward to slash and I prefer to run moonstones, which I run in my main gear, then that could be a problem. But it's not something that's super difficult to consider. And then the other conversation is like, do you run Runeglass or do you run your normal spec? I think if you're a DPS spec, just don't worry about the gems that much and run the Runeglass. Like if you're a kill squad spec or if you're a bruiser, just run the Runeglass. You'll live fine if you run Stone Form. If you don't run Stone Form, then it's a little bit of a conversation, but I'm pretty sure you just still run the Rune Glass at this point, so you do a little bit more damage. Because you're not losing that much for it. Like, I think you lose maybe 2.5. Like, if you had a 10-10 split, you would lose like 2.5 stats to one of those. So it's not that big of a deal. But in turn for that, you get increased damage. So I would generally go for that. But if you're like a Deady Point player and you're more of a util role, it doesn't make sense to run those because you're not looking to deal damage, you're looking to provide your util. Like a util role like VGBB, like what I run here, like I don't run any of the damage perks on the entire BB tree. Like I'm a pure util role, so it doesn't make any sense for me to run that damage increasing rune glass, and I'm not even taking something like deep load or ramp, because I would rather have extra dodges and a little bit of haste to move around on the point. So yeah, that's it for this one. A little bit more general. If you have questions specifically about specific builds, leave it in the comments. But again, this is very server dependent and depending on their build. Like if we're playing something like a spear, I would run heavily into fire because blunderbusses love to take advantage of spears with longer cooldowns. But again, it's super meta dependent and it's build dependent as well. It's whatever you die to the most. Like try to keep track of that and then try to ward against that a little bit more. And you'll find that you live a little bit better the more that you ward against things that soft counter you. It's not necessarily your build itself; it's also your play style. Like if I'm a bruiser and I like to healer hunt and I get hit by Dex a lot, hey, I'm probably gonna drop my slash damage down and go a little bit more physical or something like that. Or if I'm a healer but I like to kite on the point, then I'm probably gonna up my slash damage a little bit more and lower my thrust protection because I'm gonna be trying to kite to point to live rather than trying to kite away from point and deal with the Dex and bows out there. So a bit of a preference thing, a bit of a general conversation, but that's what you should be doing with your gems. The big thing is probably look to run more Fire Ward in current meta because of bows, because of which is weird, but yes, people that are bows are using fire gems. Blunderbusses are fairly common; those use fire as well, and those are the two big damage AOE nuking builds on point besides Great Axe. And you could really only ward specifically against one elemental, and you can only ward against one physical before you lose value of actually warding against something. Because Moonstone, for example, will be 5% slash, but if I run a Onyx, then it's 2.5% general. So if I ward against two physicals, then I'm just losing out on that one other type of physical damage, and I'm not really getting any benefit, so it doesn't make sense. And elemental is even more egregious. But yeah, just tend to ward against what's meta. Uh, and you will be fine and you'll do a little bit better than just running a 10-10 split and then slapping in the appropriate amulet of choice. But if you don't really know what you're doing, just do 10-10 and it's perfectly fine. Like here, I have not moved this gear set a lot on this character, so I run a 25 slash because I know I'll take a little bit more slash in every single meta because Great Axe has not ever fallen out of meta. And then 5% general and then 10% elemental because I know most metas elemental is more important. So yeah, that's what I have for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.